Welcome to the Higher Education Budget Committee, House Higher Education Budget Committee. And sorry we weren't able to meet yesterday, but we had important work, and so we're going to double up today on our agenda. And the first thing that we're going to do, we're just going to jump right into the performance-based budgeting for the regents. And so we have Elaine Frisbee with us. Elaine, welcome to the committee. Just jump right in. Thank you for providing the sheets for us. So, yep.
Small slice out of your very large notebook, so I thought it'd be helpful just to reference our pages. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Elaine Frisbee. I am with the Kansas Board of Regents, work with Blake Flanders and the team. And I believe the purpose of today's meeting is to talk about our performance agreement process and our performance-based budget for the board office. So we're going to cover the pages farther back in my testimony, but first let's reference the university performance agreements. So those are the pages that are turned sideways, landscape, in the materials behind the board office. Starting with the Emporia State University, which in your notebook would be page 77. So the performance agreements that we have, which we have in place between the Board of Regents and every one of the 32 public institutions of higher ed, those began back in 1999. So long time before the state adopted performance-based budgeting for the rest of state government, we have had this performance agreement process for our institutions. And we look every year, our academic affairs folks take a look with our data people at the metrics that the institutions have negotiated with the board that help the board understand how well our institutions are performing relative to their goals. This is a long-standing process. And because we have had that process in place in 2018, I believe it was, the legislature enacted an exemption in the budget process for performance-based budgeting so that the state universities would still be under the performance agreement process and would not participate in the performance-based budgeting process. So that is why the pages in your notebook for the 6 state universities look so different than the other state agencies' pages. The board office still provides performance-based budget information for our programs, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. But I just wanted to explain for you that distinction that we have for our universities and our colleges. I do want to explain, we do have a 200-page document, I did not bring copies for you, of all of the institution's performance agreements. So if you have interest, you can go to our website where we have performance agreements and you can access that information. The way they are constructed, and for any institution, they have certain metrics that they have picked and the board has approved them to use. You look at a 3-year point in time, an average, and then you see whether the institution is meeting those targets. Are they advancing and improving? Are they kind of holding steady? Or are they declining or not meeting their goal? So that is the process for how the board then decides whether they're able to award new state funds to that institution. So if an institution is not meeting their goal and they are unsuccessful in explaining or advising, requesting that the board allow them to get full funding, then they might have a little slice of their new state funding pulled from what they're able to accept. So I hope that's helpful. I thought I'd stop there. We can go through page by page for the universities. Yes.
Representative Riley. And if that's okay with you, we'll just kind of take questions as we go along. Okay. Yeah, Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So back me up in history. So if I was to do performance-based budgeting on the Board of Regents, not the colleges, discuss with me I think the very top thing is always, what is the consequences of not funding this program? What if we didn't fund Board of Regents at all and there was no Board of Regents? Explain that to me in history.
The board, if we did not have the agency, the Board of Regents, then we would not administer the federal funds that we administer, such as for Carl Perkins And we owe adult.
But all the colleges, excuse me, I shouldn't use the word college. So if all the universities were independent of themselves and they received their own university funding, the federal grants, all that money, there was not the administrative cover of the Board of Regents. If there was no Board of Regents, and there was a time when each one of these universities were on their own, take me back in history. How did that start and justify your existence?
The Board of Regents was originally established, I believe, in 1925, and its status in state law has evolved over time, of course. It was in 1999 when the most recent sizable adjustment was made in its responsibilities. Prior to 1999, it really focused its attention on the 6 state universities, and it has a governance role for those 6 state universities. The Board of Regents hires the 6 university CEOs. So if the Board of Regents did not exist, then the CEOs of the universities would have to be appointed by someone, hired by some person or whoever. Some entity would have to decide who's going to be the chancellor or the president of the universities. The Board of Regents then, the state funds that go to our coordinated institutions that flow through our budget would have to just simply flow through somewhere else, maybe the Department of Administration.
Or they would, going back to the local concept, they would go to the colleges, they would go to the universities, they would go to the 2-year places. So what are you making more efficient by what you're doing? Because University of Kansas can hire their own CEO, just like the city of Wichita can go in and hire their own folks. And the University of Kansas, Kansas State, Hayes, they can hire their own people. So tell me why they need this overlying board to do that.
That would be a policy decision of the legislature, whether the legislature wanted to continue to have a Kansas Board of Regents.
Do we have any other questions? Representative Rajas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, Elaine, could you go back before we had the question? You were explaining the performance-based budgeting of the performance, and if something wasn't quite done right, they could possibly lose some funding. I was kind of lost in some of that verbiage. So could you go back, like that last paragraph or so you were explaining, to make sure I fully understand?
So let's look at an example, perhaps, Representative Rajas, if that's okay. Let's look at the first one. Alphabetically, they are first. Emporia State University, you see where they have some arrows that point up and some arrows that do point down. If an institution of their 6 metrics, and I have to confess, I don't remember the exact combination, but if they'd miss the mark on 4 of their 6, they will then be expected, their chief academic officer will have to go to the board's standing academic affairs committee and explain what happened, why they missed the mark on so many of their metrics. And the board, academic affairs committee, and then the Board of Regents could say, okay, we understand the circumstances under which you didn't meet the goal. So in this case, we're going to grant you a work upward. So we have standards and definitions, and there's a whole dictionary of terminology. But you either get 100% of your new state funding, 90% of your new state funding, or 75% of your new state funding.
Based on
your performance.
Right. And so, but each individual is measured, but then also as the whole of the institution, correct?
Yes. So it's based on the metrics that you see here, and each institution, each of the 32 has negotiated their metrics and selected their own metrics. And I'm going to explain in a moment how that'll be evolving.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure. I thought that's what I heard you say, but I want to make sure as we go through, because I think it has been brought up before, but it's been a while since we've kind of had this kind of a talk. So thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
You're welcome. Quick question too, just going along with that. In the years since 1999, when you've kind of had the performance agreements, have there been instances where the institutions did not get the full funding? And it was directly tied to their performance agreements? Okay, great. And each one, I'm looking at them, they're all different. So each one of the institutions has a different set of metrics.
Yes.
Okay.
For now, yes, that is correct. We are re-engineering our process, however. So that was my next point. First, I want to point out the Board of Regents did adopt a new strategic plan in 2020, and I note the link there for you, and I did bring a copy, but in their new strategic plan, there are 3 pillars of the board's plan, one of which is to help Candace families, which circles a lot with affordability for students to be able to attend an institution of our system. Another one is to help businesses with what they need, a talented pipeline of workforce, and to enhance our state's economic prosperity. So as we are right now here in early 2022, our system is in the midst of re-engineering our performance agreements. So as you see, these are just the 6, a rendition of the 6. We're going to be a little more standard in our metrics going forward. And that is yet to be determined what those metrics are. We're still working on all of that. We are doing some work on reviewing our processes for student services. The National Institute of Student Success at Georgia State is doing some work with us to look at how our universities and community colleges are advising students. Are they getting the best results for our students and moving them along in their academic career? So that's going to influence the work that they're doing on how we restructure our performance agreements. The board is also retuning its CEO assessment tool, how it evaluates the 6 CEOs at the 6 universities, and they are directly tying that tool to their strategic plan. So that's all I really wanted to cover as far as the universities, the 6 universities.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? Representative Fairchild.
As far as the CEOs being appointed by the board, are they just appointed by the board, or does the board also determine their salary as well?
I'm sorry.
Who determines the salary of the university CEOs?
Board of Regents sets the salary for the 6 CEOs.
And a clarifying question. You mentioned 3 things, and in the new strategic plan, that was family, I'm shortening, family, businesses, economic prosperity. Are you saying that the metrics that you'll be using that might be more standardized have to do with those 3 areas?
Correct.
And do you have a timeline on when you might be having that?
You know, that I can't say because I'm not as directly involved in that process. Our academic affairs officers and our data folks are working more heavily on that than I am. But that is clearly a key interest to the board and to the institutions. So we're moving on it. But it will be influenced by the work that the review that our partners are doing with Georgia State.
Right. And the universities and the other educational institutions, are they going to have a say in what those metrics are also? Do they have a part of that?
I believe it'll be a discussion with the institutions. One advantage of what we want to do with standardizing then makes it easily documentable that anybody in the public could go trace that information. As it is now, it is hard to document some of the metrics that some of the institutions have chosen.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions? Okay. Thank you, Elaine. Keep going.
Okay, we can then talk a little bit about the board office and our performance-based budgeting. So we have a 200-page budget document that we submit as a state agency. We do have numerous performance measures in our budget. Shirley then takes our 200-page document and distills it down into her budget analysis, which she will present to you, I believe, next week. We do have several major programs in our agency. Our administration program is about 3% of our overall funding. Much of that is our data team. We have a group of folks who, according to state law, We gather a lot of information on our students in our system, and then that is how we are able to assist legislators, the governor's office, the public in understanding what's going on with our system. So that's a cost of our agency to administer. And then we also have the Postsecondary Education Institutions Program. That's our largest one. That is where all the state appropriations that you make to the coordinated institutions flow through us. So where the Board of Regents has a program like Excel and CTE, with assistance with the Tech Ed Authority, we push that money out to the institutions according to their decisions. And then we do administer 17, 18 state student financial aid programs to assist students finding affordable ways to attend our institutions. That's really, I wasn't going to go into a lot of detail. We can certainly go through our pages if you have interest.
Did you include the Board of Regents performance-based budgeting in our packet?
I did.
Why don't we just take a quick peek at that? What page is that on?
The 5th page back.
Okay.
And these are the vertical pages. So if you look at the very bottom, it says Board of Regents.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Administration, post-secondary.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, everyone just take a quick look at that. And these are your the different programs: administration, post-secondary, and then the student financial aid. Mm-hmm.
To clarify a little bit more, there's the performance-based budgeting information, the metrics we provide in our 200-page document for the division of the budget in the budget instructions that we follow. And then there was this new process just this last summer that was started with legislative research, where we filled out this new template to parallel the other forms, I guess, go in parallel.
Okay, as y'all look at those 3 pages, does anyone have any questions?
Sure.
Yes, Representative Rajas.
I've asked everybody that's come before me, that's performance-based budgeting, and the Regents is a little bit bigger than some of our smaller ones. So is this, and I know you're not maybe not directly filling in all these, but does this help you in kind of your role, in the financial role, with the data that you're getting, even though you're probably dealing more with .00s than this, but do you think this data is helping all of us get a better understanding of the workings of the Regents?
I'm not sure, Madam Chair, if I might. I'm not sure that this format was maybe as helpful for us. And to that end, I've provided you on the 4th page of my document. I thought it would be helpful for you as legislators, decision makers, to understand what data resources we do have available. We are a data team intensive agency, and we have devoted a lot of time and energy in our role then to use and leverage the information that we do collect from the institutions so that the public can understand better what's going on. So I give you just a rendition here. I think Shirley previewed for you last week, or the week before, our data books. So those are our longest standing publication going back many years, especially for the state universities. We do a separate sector data book. We have one for the state universities that has been published. We do another one for the community colleges, one for Washburn, and one for the tech colleges. So those are going to be launched quickly and soon. But most importantly, I want you to know about what we call key stats. We have a self-service reporting tool on our website, and I show you how to navigate there, where we have many dashboards worth of information on by sector, by system for all 32 institutions, or by each individual institution, all kinds of enrollment, demographics, subsets of information. We have high school enrollment, so we have one tab that just highlights and explains for you all the high school enrollments in our system. We have fall census information, how students transfer. So if someone transfers from Cali Community College to Wichita State, how well do they do academically when they transfer to Wichita State? So you get a sense for how important transfers are. Our credentials, how many credentials are we generating at each institution or across the system? Could be an associate degree, could be a PhD, any sort of credential. Our Student Success Index, which is somewhat kind of like a graduation rate. So if someone does go from Cali to Wichita State, they're still a success. They still count as a positive in our system. It's only if they depart without getting the credential somewhere in our system or somewhere else at an institution that we consider that an X, not a check mark. So we do keep track of that. Also, importantly, we track employment and wage information so that those who do graduate, we can advise you as to how well they're faring in the Kansas economy. And then also, of course, the finances of our institutions. And then we also give you a bunch of other resources there. We are going to add some features to key stats here in the first quarter of the year, including graduation rates and retention rates. So if someone drops out, leaves an institution after a semester or a year, we track that. Also report to you on tuition and fees. We make sure that all that information in our website is something that you can download it straight into Excel and make use for yourself. More importantly, we have Kansas Degree Stats. I hope you're all familiar with our Kansas Degree Stats website. You passed a bill last year, 2085, Students' Right to Know. That website is now a requirement for every student, grades 7 through 12, to go there and get an understanding. You want to go to the University of Kansas and study visual arts? Okay, here's what your prospects are, what it's going to cost you, and what wages you're going to earn after you graduate. You want to go to K-State and study architecture? Here's how that's going to happen for you. So we do that we publish that information for every student, every degree program who is a Kansas resident, actual Kansas results. So it isn't just national data that you might find in a college calculator. This is unique to just Kansas students and is based on actual cost information for our students. And similarly, so that website, Degree Stats, is for associate degrees and baccalaureate degrees. If you're interested in knowing similar types of outcomes or shorter term programs, especially, we have the K-Tip report that we publish every year. If you want to go be a lineman, study lineman at Pratt, you can see how much income you might expect to earn by doing that. We have a transfer portal where we help students understand if you take a certain class at one of our two-year colleges and then transfer to university or vice versa, it will be accepted credit. You don't have to do a takeover. That's an expense for our students and time loss that we want to avoid that. We also have a program search tool. If you're wondering what institutions in our state offer a program in X, Y, or Z, you can go see where those might be. Of course, we publish a lot of information on tuition and fees, costs for students. We have a military articulation portal. This is a rather unique tool. If you're at Fort Riley, you're an active soldier in the Army, and you're wondering, I've gotten training while I'm in the Army, what kind of college credit could I get for that prior learning? We have 83 unique occupational specialties on that site. 28 military courses have been articulated to college courses in our system. 31 of our public institutions have provided articulations for members of the military. And then lastly, I show you that we do have some external partners that we work with. Sometimes we provide data to them, sometimes they provide information to us. So I thought that's the sort of information that you as legislators and policymakers might be a little bit more interested in. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's a wealth of information. Thank you for providing that. I hope y'all will all take note of that. Okay, great. What else?
Other than that, last week, Madam Chair, you had asked about state universities funding and state general fund, sort of how that has tracked in recent years. So the very last page of what I've given you is just the highest level of an attempt at getting you some context there. Yes, with the arrows pointing down and through time. So going way back when the session abruptly ended, I think it was March 2020, we all went home. you enacted a budget for fiscal year 2021. And then a few months later, we had an allotment from Governor Kelly. So we started with the $635 million. That includes that year swap that we had in the allotment. So we had $635 million. It increases slightly in 22, drops a little bit in our allocation when we were last summer, but then now the governor has proposed a budget adding about $46 million back. So I'm hoping that helps you kind of see some of that. Part of what the governor is recommending, and Dr. Flanders is going to talk about this in way more detail in his budget presentation, part of that is to restore some of the little dings that the universities have absorbed within the 2021-22 budgets.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? Okay, and then I think you can look through this packet and see each of the individual universities also and the different metrics that they have and arrows up and arrows down and how they've done. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much, Elaine. We appreciate you coming. Okay, committee, now we're going to go on to what we actually had on the agenda yesterday, which is Shirley explaining the new budget analysis format for us. And she gave us an example. You have on your desk the Department of Agriculture handout. And she's going to tell us why this isn't really the real thing.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. It's the real thing. It's just that we created the document in October, and we realized since this was the first year of it, we've had to tweak it slightly. So I'll just tell you some of the tweaks. First, I wanted to tell you, you have a blue sheet of paper in front of you there. This gives you an idea of the next 2 weeks of your work, which is the majority of what you do in this committee is looking at the budgets. And so you have dates there. There will be budget hearings, and a budget hearing will consist of myself or another analyst going through the budget analysis, and then that agency gets up and they testify on what they want to talk about. And then you will give recommendations on that budget the next day or a few days later. And then those recommendations will be written up in a subcommittee report, which your chair will present to House Appropriations, which is what is report out.
Yep, and as long as you're bringing that up, I was going to mention to the committee, not next week, but the week after that starts on February 7th, we're going to have a committee every day that week, including Friday. So just to be prepared for that. And that's what we have to do if we're going to have the time that we all desire to have with each of the universities. We want a full day with each one. And because of that, we will be having committee on that Friday, which is the 11th. Okay, and then, and in the meantime, next week we'll be doing those smaller, some of the fee-based budgets. So we look at, we'll be doing those, and then we'll be doing the recommendations the day after. I think y'all have gotten your agenda for next week already. But then it's the next week that's going to be the big one for us. And then also note on February 21st is when we do all of our recommendations for that whole group of universities. So just plan on that day, really eating a lot of protein for lunch and being just really bright and sharp that day. So is candy good for our brains?
Candy's good for energy.
Okay, all right, we'll bring candy that day then. Okay, so that's just making sure everyone knows about that. Anything else as far as just housekeeping?
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay.
One of the procedural processes I'm just going to touch on right now, and I need to provide you with an actual copy of this so that you will have it, is how we're going to do the signature pages for the subcommittee reports. with COVID and everything, again, they have decided not to actually have a paper copy that I have to pass around to each person to get a signature for. So there won't be a signature page on top of the packet that the chair will provide to House Appropriations. What we will do is, as soon as I possibly can, the afternoon or the next day after you have provided recommendations, like let's say the first two are Healing Arts and Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board, you will give recommendations that next day. Now, this is a 1:30 committee. We get done at 3. I will go back to my office. I will start working on those. That night, you will probably get an email from me after I have reviewed those recommendations with the chair first. Make sure we're all on the same page. You will get an email by me, and if you don't respond at all, you're saying these recommendations, and you're not agreeing to the recommendations. That's one of the misnomers. You're just saying we've gone through the process and I'm okay with this process continuing through to the full committee. That's what that signature means. So since we're not doing signatures, if I send you the email with the subcommittee report, you in essence have received it. If I don't hear from you, then you're saying, I'm okay, it can go through the process. If you don't agree that it goes through the process, you need to email me and or the chair. If you have any kind of disagreement or don't believe we've fulfilled the obligation of the committee, then the chair has to report that to House Appropriations when she goes through the budgets. Does that make sense? And again, I'll bring you all a copy of this.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, ready.
In addition to that, just as a sideline, for those of you who may not be familiar with a minority report, minority reports can be presented by anybody, prepared by anybody. You don't have to be a member of a minority party. If there's something in the recommendations you don't agree with and you want to add a minority report to the chair's packet, I'd be happy to show you what some of those look like. It could be anything from just one sentence that says, I don't agree with the process, or I don't agree with one particular item, and then you sign it. It's very simple. But if you're interested in those, that's available to you as well.
Yeah, so do y'all understand the difference? What Shirley sends us in the email is, okay, we've gone through the process. Yes, I agree that we made recommendations and we did that. But if it's not, if you disagree with the recommendations, that's the minority report. That cleared everybody? Okay. Representative Riley, question?
Yes. So no, I watched your presentation last year when you took this to Probes, and so would our chairman read our minority report comment at that time, or that would just be published and not read?
It's up to the chair if they want to read it, or the person who presented the minority report can be in committee and read their own report.
And that is different. I know that we added a committee voted on comment whenever we had it, when we did our budget. I'm trying to think of the
That's a recommendation.
recommendation.
You'll remember, a recommendation can be add money, add language, delete language, or add some kind of a comment on, you think somebody did a good job on something. Those don't go any farther in the budget. It's not something that gets added to the budget, whereas the add and delete languages would change the budget. But the budget committees in the House can make comments.
And so that minority report, can it be signed by 2 or 3 people even though there wasn't any motion? It just could be.
Correct. That's an individual process by individual people. So if one person wants to do it, if 3 people of the committee want to get together and do one, That's up to you.
All right, thank you.
And Shirley, correct me, but I think last year we had one, and I did read the statement in committee.
We had an
Mhm.
email from a member who had wanted to object to the signature page, and the chair did read it to the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have provided you with the Budget Analysis Department of Agriculture. The reason we provided this one is this is the template that was provided to the Legislative Budget Committee back in October when we were first finalizing our new template style. So this is very generic. It's from last year's data, and it doesn't affect or reflect anything for this year. So I just wanted to make you aware of some of the changes. The front table is the exact same as our budget analysis from previous years. There's really no change there. There's a definition of what the agency is and what they do. Instead of what we used to have was a summary of legislation from past years, we have an executive summary which provides you what changes have been made to that budget since last year. The other two changes, one of the biggest changes we made in this budget analysis is there's a lot more charts and graphs, and it's much more colorful. We're trying to liven it up a little bit. So you will be provided with a bar chart of 2021 or actually for this year, it'll be 2022 and 2023 numbers. What the legislature approved last year for the current year, what the agency is requesting, and what the governor is recommending. The one little tweak we made on this template is we added out to the right side of these bar graphs what the total amount adds up to, because we noticed that we had this bar graph with different numbers in it with different colors, but we don't give you the actual total of their budget. So we just put a total number out to the right-hand side. Page 2 at the top. So in that first bar chart where you have 2021 legislature, there's 9.8 million of SGF, there's 10 million of federal funds, there's 32.3 million of all other funds. There will be a number out at the end, which is the total budget. There will be, yes. And then we're trying to be a little bit easier to read. So there's a lot more bullets and bolding of specific line items that as analysts, we will explain to you what the changes are on those budgets for both 22 and 23. And we use the same format where we give you the agency's request and then the governor's recommendation. And again, on the next page, it's kind of the exact same thing, only it's the budget year. On page 4, this table looks very similar but much easier to read. This is what we call the summary of operating table. And this is the entire budget broken down by expenditure categories where we talk about salaries and wages, contractual services, commodities, capital outlay, aid to locals, capital improvements, and then at the bottom, the financing is broken out by the different funds. Again, trying to be a little more easy to read. We are doing for agencies that have state general fund, we'll do a little line graph of the actuals, and then there'll be a split if there's a difference between the agency's request and the governor's recommendation. You'll see where they disagree on those numbers, where they're not the same. We'll do the same thing with whatever different funds that we think we need to identify, whether it's state water plan fund or with the universities, it could be the tuition, the general fee fund, and then an explanation of what that fund is and where that money comes from. What we will usually do as analysts, because as you know, we don't go through every page of the budget analysis, we will most likely start on page 6 which is the in-depth definition and description of the current year's budget. So we changed the table a little bit, and I don't know how many of you have seen our appropriation reports, which is the report we do at the end of session, where we take a table and we say, here's what the agency requested, here are the changes the governor made, and here's what the legislature did, and here are the final numbers. So what we've done here is we've said, here's what the legislature approved last year, here's where you left last year. Here are the changes that were made, and those are only going to be things like reappropriations, or if there was an allotment or something that happened between the time legislature ended last year and where we're starting this year. And then there's the agency's request and what they're adding in or subtracting out that's different from what that was approved last year. And then the governor's recommendation, which again would be any change from what the legislature, or I'm sorry, what the agency requested. So it's a really kind of a flow through of every change made to the current year's budget since the time you left last session. And then we'll explain those again with bullets and text. And then on the next page, again, this is something, and this came about because House Appropriations almost always asks the question, what's the difference between the actuals for the year prior to the current year and the current year? So we've put together a little bar chart to explain the actuals from the preceding year and the current year, because that's almost always a question that we get. So we've put together a little information on that. And then the next table on page 10 would be the budget year, which will be 2023. And so we will start off with, what did the agency request in 22? What did they add or change? And then what did the governor add or change for the final 2023 budget? You'll see it in the table form, and then we'll explain it in the text. So it really does give you a much clearer breakdown of whatever the changes will be.
Yes, Representative Riley.
So Shirley, and I understand this is budget,
Correct.
and we had some discussion of this in our 9 o'clock water committee meeting this morning about that. So where does it show the carryover that some of the departments have from year to year that get carried forward that affects your budget?
That's for state general fund, that's a reappropriation. That's in your current year budget.
Okay, so there would be a line item saying this was a carryover from last year that we didn't spend.
In the
Like a
budget on page 6,
contingency.
you will see that number 1 is SGF reappropriations, and that's what your carry forward is. It's called
Okay.
reappropriations. It's at the very top.
Okay, so on the county level, we could call a contingency fund your reappropriation fund. That's what you're calling it?
For state general fund, there has to be language in the bill, and this is something I showed you when I showed you the big appropriation, that some funds have a proviso that says if you have more than $100 left in this fund, it can be reappropriated. So if the SGF accounts have that language in them and they don't spend every part of that fund, then it can reappropriate.
So carryover from extra salaries and benefits from last year that didn't get spent, you can carry those over to the next year.
If you have the reappropriation language and it's state general fund, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Now, if you're interested in any of the other funds the agencies have, you can ask us about them and we can tell you. But for the most part, we talk about state general fund in the budget as far as the carry forward and the reappropriation.
Okay, and then Shirley had a quick question. On page 10, the first paragraph with words, agency requests, FY 2022 expenditures of 51.5 million. Now, where do I see that on the chart right above it?
That is the agency request total on the right-hand side in the middle of the page. Line 7, at the below line 7, 51.5.
I see.
Yeah, that's the total agency request.
Yep, got it. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Okay, other questions?
And then similar to last year, if we had allotments, reduced resources, enhancements, we've kind of called them out a little bit, made them a little more colorful, a little more easier to read. You'll see some gray shaded pages on 12 and 13. We have a box of special topics if for some other reason we think as an analyst that there's a special topic you need to know about. For instance, I will tell you in the post-secondary education system-wide, I did a special topic on deferred maintenance because we've been talking about that. So it's up to the analyst to decide if there's something that they think is a special topic that they'll call out and give you more information on. And then the last few pages, we probably as analysts won't go over, and it's because those are the programs broken out and the performance measures. And since we've already gone over the performance measures, unless there's something specifically you want to talk about, we'll skip those. And then the very last page I wanted to talk about, 28, is the capital improvements. Nothing really has changed there other than the format looks a little bit different. So we're hoping this is a little easier to read. It has a little better flow as far as the expenditures and what the agency's asking for and what the governor's recommending is a little easier to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like some good changes. So
we hope so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, question, Representative Wassinger. And
I want to tell you, this is great. This is much easier to go through and read. But I have a suggestion, and take it for how much you paid.
Sure.
And this was true when I was a county commissioner and we were doing adult juvenile corrections. There are so many acronyms and so many words that you use differently in the state than you do in corrections or you do anywhere else. And what the 23rd Judicial District did was every meeting I went to, they had a glossary page. So it was not, in terms of, well, actually an acronym page where it would say, we're talking, appropriations, or reallotments, and I think for newer legislators and as well as some that haven't been on budget committees, it would be, I noticed with Representative Riley when he was asking the questions, that more like this. And I think it just helps you as you can refer back and say, okay, I got it. This is what the allotments are.
so like a definition page?
Definition page, not glossary.
We actually have that in-house that I would absolutely be delighted to give you a copy of. We have a fiscal reference guide that has a very large glossary. Now, the difference would be they are specific terms that we use for our fiscal analysis. What they won't do is give you specific programs or acronyms specific to an agency or an agency program. But if those are described within the budget analysis, hopefully our editors do a good job of spelling it out the first time it's used and then doing the acronym. Yes. We do that. Yes. But we do have a fiscal glossary that explains everything.
I think the fiscal glossary would be amazing.
I would be happy to provide that.
Because even there are times, and I've been on this committee for 4 years, I still look at something and think, does that mean? And I listen to my roommates talking about education, and they're going through acronyms and they're going through different topics of K through 12. And then I stop and I'm like, oh, wait, what are you talking about? Explain that one for me. So I think that would be really helpful for everyone.
One thing you might notice, and I'm glad you brought up acronyms, one thing you might notice in this template, one of the decisions was made is when we write out the text of the agency requests this much money, which includes this much state general fund, we used to spell out state general fund every time we use it, and now we use SGF.
Yeah.
But we still get people that ask us what SGF is.
And that's why
First time.
that would be great. Yeah. So.
Is that a hard copy you're providing or an
Yes.
electronic? Okay.
I can do both. I mean, I can scan it and give it to you, and I can.
Is a hard copy okay with everyone, or would you prefer electronic? You want electronic? Would you let Shirley know how you would like it, please?
Or I can just send it to your committee assistant electronic, and
Okay.
I'll bring paper copies.
Okay, that'd be great. Do that. Okay, Representative Riley, then Fairchild. Did you have a question? You did have a
It's on the
question.
last page, and
Yeah.
I think this is a question to you.
Okay.
So this is the page that for like the universities that we're going to be talking about, some of the buildings and stuff for the universities.
Mhm.
This is where,
Your chair will be getting a copy of this last page of the Postsecondary Education on Monday, the 31st, and she will be reviewing it so she can tell you all about it.
okay, but this is where we would see that, right?
Yes.
Right. Mhm. The capital improvements, now, this is not the deferred maintenance, which is whole nother thing that we'll be talking about too.
I
And the
understand
other,
capital
the
Okay.
other difference is there's two separate capital improvement reports that I talked about. This is part of the budget, which is just the current year and the budget year. The other part the Joint Building Committee looks at during the interim is the 5-year capital improvement plan, which is a real thick book tabbed by the universities. I'd be happy to give you a copy of it if you'd like it. It's a public document that they reviewed while they were visiting K-State Library that was rebuilt this last interim.
I might, but Madam
Yeah,
Chair.
yes,
So going back to that, so
right.
I didn't realize that there was two different documents on those capital improvements. So the second capital improvements, those 5-year pile.
Mhm.
So are those going to be the ones that they're basically have been bonded, that there are extended amount of capital improvements over 5, 10, 20 years kind of thing that we're going to be looking at? Or are we talking about capital improvements that are 5 years or less that we're doing to some kind of buildings, let's say adding an annex on someplace?
Yep.
So
So just, our committee just looks at the capital improvements, not the 5-year. That's the,
I could explain
Yep.
what you were asking on the 5-year. It's not what buildings take 5 years to build. It's what are we looking out into the future to build over the next 5 years? Well, the book only goes out 5 years. So it's what buildings, and I think they use the caveat over $1 million, which you can't build much less than $1 million. But it's what are we looking at building over the next 5 years that we need on campus. Now, that's going to be a little bit different than a lot of what we will talk about is like rehab and repair and deferred maintenance, because those are smaller projects and they're kind of here and there and everywhere, where the 5-year capital improvement plan are the large new building projects.
so those would be like when we went to WSU, some of the new buildings that they're putting on WSU to expand out WSU probably.
No, because if you're talking about where the golf course used to be, those are not state-owned
That's all-
buildings.
that's all private.
Private.
that's all private.
Those are private companies.
So, and the bonding would be the state, when you ask about bonding, that would just be the state. But a lot of the building going on campuses now is going to be private, or it's going to be
It's
gifts.
owned by Spirit and Airbus and all the companies that are coming out there. Yeah, Starbucks, there's a hotel, there's restaurants.
So does the university still own that land?
They own the land.
So then they're leasing out to Starbucks and all those other places, a 99-year lease or something? Interesting.
Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When we're talking about allotments, that refers to a cut the governor makes on our own, right? I don't know if this really matters, but it just seems like kind of a weird word to refer to an allotment as a cut, because I was just looking at the dictionary definition. It says the amount of something allocated to a particular person. So why do we refer to a word like that as a cut when it seems like it should be the opposite?
Which is exactly why I asked for, because this is there's a whole different language in the Capitol.
It's funny, but I know when COVID started and we're all worried, they're like, the governor's going to do allotments. And I'm like, what does that mean? So do you know where the history of?
I have to go back and look at the
Okay.
history of it, but some people do get confused on allotments. It's the governor has and I'm going to see if my budget people left, so if I speak, I'll get an email. The governor can allot the executive branch agencies. The state is obligated to have a balanced budget. So what's interesting is twice a year we do a consensus revenue estimate. And we say, we estimate that we're going to bring in this much money. So this is the amount of money you have to spend. Well, unfortunately, there have been years where we've missed the mark on our consensus revenue estimate and the money didn't come in. So the governor can't recommend an unbalanced budget, and the legislature can't pass an unbalanced budget. We have had years, not too long ago, where the legislature had to go in and cut the budgets on the supplemental bill because the revenue didn't come in, and our current bill was not balanced. So we had to go take money back from the agencies that we'd already given them.
What's the difference between an allotment and a line item veto of a spending measure?
Just the timing mechanism. An allotment is when the governor will say, we do not believe we're getting the revenue in that we need to, so I'm going to pull back some of the executive branch state general fund money, whereas a line item veto is she has received a bill that's passed through the legislature and she just doesn't agree with whatever that line item is, so it gets stricken. Now, the legislature does have the prerogative to come back into session, or if it's during session, override the veto. But the legislature can't override an allotment because that's her executive branch. Now, if the governor wants to take money from the legislative branch or the judicial branch, then that has to go through the legislative process.
Representative Amex.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Shirley, so talking about allotment, the difference between allotment and the governor's recommendation includes shrinkage.
Oh, don't talk about shrinkage. Shrinkage, and this shrinkage is going to be in the glossary. And I'm going to try to explain it, but I'm not going to guarantee I won't come back tomorrow and fix it. Shrinkage is part of the salary and wage category. And it's where the agency goes in and says, okay, we are budgeting for, I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible. I'm budgeting for 50 people at these salaries at X amount of dollars. But we know not all 50 people for that entire year are going to stay here. There may be retirements, there may be people leave, different things happen. So they budget a percentage of shrinkage, which means we may not need all of that budget because the employment is going to change. And I know shrinkage is used as a budgetary tool. I'm not going to go any farther than that. But it's a very complex situation.
Okay, you going to ask another question for?
I just want to make
For
sure.
some
I understand.
reasons.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Uh-huh.
So there is a difference between allotment and shrinkage.
Yeah, shrinkage is just salaries and wages. An allotment is taking from a budget.
Okay. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Madam.
And Shirley, when you said the governor can do an allotment in the executive branch, but she did an allotment with the universities.
They're in the executive branch.
Okay.
There's executive branch, legislative branch.
Yeah.
Judicial branch.
Yes, true. Okay.
The state
Is that-
agencies, except for
The legislature and the
legislature
courts.
and us are, where we're in the
Right.
executive and the judges, everything else is executive.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Shirley, is that?
So any other questions, any information you want or need before we start budgets on Monday?
Representative Blessinger?
I don't think anyone can honestly say that we have everything we need until Monday. We'll
Well,
have
any-
lots of questions,
Anything that
Shirley.
can
Thank
think
you.
about.
We are deeply grateful that you are so adept and so knowledgeable and help us do our job. So thank you.
Yeah, so Monday we will have Behavioral Science Regulatory Board and the Board of Healing Arts. And we do not have committee meeting tomorrow or Friday. So enjoy that while you have a bit of a break. And we're adjourned. Thank you.